Alrighty, I'm here to break down the Galactic Championship, including my run into the top 4 of the event. This is going to be really exciting. I'm going to break down the meta, talk about my deck, talk about the rounds I played, and a whole lot of deck reviews from that top 8. Before we get going, though, please hit that subscribe button, and if you're interested in some more content from me, do check out my Patreon as well. Alright, so let's keep this part brief. What am I going to do? First, I'm going to show you my deck and talk about it, why I ran it, why I made some of the choices I did. I'm going to review my whole top 4 run. I'll focus on a few matchups that I found a little more interesting or that I wanted to kind of talk about some highlights in. Then we'll go into the event itself. I'm going to talk about the meta, like the breakdowns between day 1 to day 2, day 3. We'll talk about what decks to expect moving forward. I will break down the top 8 deck lists as well, and just talk about the interesting stuff there, and then a little bit about looking forward into the next round of big events. Alright, so I ran Quinlan Tarkentown at this event. Not a brand new deck, a deck that's gotten a couple new cool pieces to it, like Adigalia being a really solid 2-drop to play in the deck, especially because she can turn on that force throw really early. Depa Balaba, I played 3 copies of it. This card was fantastic for me. It's very good into like all these like mid-rangey battles, of which a lot of the meta is things like Hantu, the Mirrors, Talzin, Cad Bane, stuff like that. She was just very good into a lot of stuff. And I did also play a couple copies of the Quinlan Voss unit to shore up the 4-drop slot. He was just okay, to be honest. Didn't do a ton most of the day, but he is a decent include. The more interesting stuff, I would say, is the sideboard. You can see that I'm playing almost a full sideboard dedicated to 2 major archetypes. One is aggro, where I have things like Bombing Run for Vader, Bamboozle for any pilot deck, including Vader and Sabine. Waylays, of course, also for aggro, but also does come in against control decks that play things like Avenger. And then the 3rd copy of Spark of Rebellion, also for those control decks. I did move 1 Millennium Falcon to the sideboard because I found in most of the mid-range bashes I wasn't playing that card very much, but I did want access to it again for aggro decks like Sabine and Vader, and also the control decks were having a card that can do quick damage after like a super laser blast is very important. And lastly, I included 2 copies of the Aggrieved Parliamentarian because I found that one of the more difficult matchups for me was actually the Kylo green deck. Now, this card will become interesting in a moment when we talk about the Kylo red deck that became very popular, played by a majority or a large portion of the BN team. And then incidentally, of course, the card would be pretty good there. Not an auto win against any Kylo deck by any means, just a very useful piece to have access to, and your opponent would, of course, have to be able to play around it to not get blown out by its effect. So the sideboard, basically none of it was for the mid-range decks. I would bring in like sometimes a Waylay or 2 against some of them, but mostly I was just pre-boarded for all of that, and the sideboard was for the hard aggro and the control decks, including like the Kylo. The deck ran incredibly smoothly. It took me into a top 4 at the event, where I did get knocked out by a Kylo Tarkentown deck. But yeah, right now, if I was making a couple changes, I probably would just cut 1 or 2 of the Quinlans. I'd definitely go up to the 3rd Kira. I only had 2 in the deck. I liked the 1 Disabling Fang Fighter. Didn't play it very often, but I think just having it in the deck gives you an interesting out in some situations. And then I would look at cards like Landspeeder, which I played a lot in testing, but found that just wasn't as good as the other 2-drops, but it is something I would want to revisit, and then potentially some other stuff as well. So this is the run. This is my day 2 run. Of course, I was qualified for day 2. I didn't have to play in day 1, and I finished 8-0. I was the only undefeated player after day 2. I started with an Obi blue mid-range deck, which I 2-0'd. A Piet red, which absolutely obliterated me in game 1. Invisible Hand. He ramped, played Invisible Hand on turn 3. pulled out the droid that deals 2 damage to you and just kind of raced me, and died very quickly. But I was able to interact a lot more and keep my opponent off of big ships in games 2 and 3, especially with things like waylay and removal, and just not letting like a big turbo laser just end my life. Then I 2-0'd a Han 2. Blue, I played this matchup a ton. I don't think Quinlan is like heavily favored into it, but I know my lines on this with my eyes closed. I know exactly what I'm supposed to be able to do. I was able to take that one down. Boss Blue 2-0. This is a very good matchup for Quinlan. It's just very difficult for Boss to get ahead in these games. Quinlan has a lot of hasted damage with things like Cassian and Millennium Falcon, a lot of smuggle, so just a lot of card density that the boss has to grind through. And just, I find that matchup pretty solid for Quinlan. Yoda Red, which is, in a way similar to the Han 2 Blue. I find it a little easier than Han 2 for Quinlan. It's just, you can really apply pressure. Those 4 drops like Kiadi and Itinerant Warrior are so much more deadly when they're coming out a turn earlier. And then in round 6, another Han 2 Blue, so it's my 3rd Blue-Red hero deck. I was able to 2-1 this one. Game 2, I got triple Force Thrown. It's unfortunate. Definitely lost that one. These were all 3 very tight games. Opponent played this deck very well, but I was able to squeak this one out. And then round 7 and 8, these were both actually on stream, on the FFG stream. So if you're interested in watching these 2 games, you certainly could. I was able to 2-0 a Vader 4. In game 1, I held on to a Han Solo in case I would hit a force throw, which I did. So I was able to just pin his leader. He had to flip eventually, killed it. I also drew, game 1, I'm probably a little lighter into Vader. I have a lot of sideboard tech for this matchup, but I did draw 2 A-Wings and like 2 Red 5s. So I just drew a lot of my space. So I was able to interact for a while. And of course, the 1-shot in the leader. And then game 2, I bring in like 6 or 7 cards for my sideboard. In this one, I just curved out space. I had a Disabling Fang Fighter to kill his pilot when he flipped it. So Vader never actually attacked me in either of these games, which of course is a recipe for success. And then round 8 was a 2-0 against Talzin Red. Game 1, if you're interested in watching, is one of the grindiest Quinlan games I've ever played. There were moments there where I thought I would not be able to come back into it, but finished that game off with I was empty-handed. I drew a Quinlan and a Depa. He had a Lone Pike in play and a Ruthless Raider. He was only at, I believe, 7 or 6 health remaining, though, so I just needed to try to find a way to stick a unit. I played the Quinlan, pinged his Lone Pike. He immediately killed the Quinlan with the power of the dark side. Was able to play Depa to kill the Lone Pike and present a lethal threat because likely I had a Hotshot Blaster in the row. My opponent didn't have removal for the Depa, so I had to decide if he was going to claim early or play something and hope I didn't have the blaster. He took the play something line because I just don't think he thought he had enough outs to like hope to top deck into a removal to killer. So he's just counting on me maybe not having a blaster. I played Churret, and of course, Depa has Saboteur. My opponent knew that from the start. It was just the line he had, and I did have the blaster. Was able to grind out that win. And then, finished 2-0 there. So that was the end of day 1 with an 8-0 finish. Last undefeated player. And we start day 3, me knowing that basically if I win one of my next 3 games, I will be qualified for the top 8. And I did get a mirror match against a very good young French player named Junior, who is on the Bothan Network team. He played Quinlan. We had a mirror. Crazy game. Kid's very good at the game. This took a lot out of me. Was able to take this one 2-1. He beat me in game 2. I took the first and the third. And that basically did lock me in to the top 8. But round 10, I was going to play that just in case. I did get 0-2'd by Kylo Tarkintown, the first of the 2 Kylos that beat me at this event. My primary deck, my main deck, is very soft against this Kylo deck. It does not have a lot of interaction for anything they're doing. I don't even play Waylays in the main deck. I did not expect to be able to win game 1. Game 2, I board in 6 cards, 2 Waylays, because they do play a lot of units that they try to suit up with upgrades. This Kylo deck is basically an aggro deck, and those Waylays can help a lot just keeping my opponent off of things like unit into fallen lightsaber, for instance, or whatever it may be. I bring in bamboozles, which are very good against this deck. Kylo does try to hit you for a bunch of damage on his flip, and especially if he doesn't have snapshot reflexes in his discard, bamboozle can be incredibly powerful. And of course, the aggrieved parliamentarian to remove the discard. This isn't just for Kylo. I want to stress that. I'll talk about it later in the semifinal game, but being able to turn off an Anakin, being able to do a double shrink or even a single shrink with the parliamentarian, so you do this on like the 5 resource turn, is very powerful. It's not just about shutting off the Kylo. Game 1, I lost pretty cleanly. Like I said, I don't have much interaction. Game 2, I did get my opponent to 24 in this one. I lost. There were a couple huge pivot points in this game. First of all, I did not have a turn 1 unit to play, which set me back a lot. Like, the Quinlan is definitely the aggressor in this matchup, so not being able to play a turn 1 unit. I had a spark after my mulligan, so I had to fire it off. My opponent had 2 turn 1 plays. I took one of them. He played a Secretive Sage, and that Secretive Sage stayed in play the entire game and ended up killing me at the end with a Fallen Lightsaber and then a Hot Shot Blaster to deal Exaxes. And the other big pivot point in this one was I played a Kira on the 4R turn to block a card in my opponent's hand, and I knew everything in my opponent's hand at that point, so I felt safe to flip the next turn. But my opponent did draw Force Lightning to one-shot my Quinlan off the top, and I did have a bamboozle in that game, and that really kept me, that almost got me the win. He flipped that Kylo, I shut it down, was able to kill the Kylo that turn, and I had 2 lethal attackers in space, but my opponent had that Secretive Sage, and was 1 action ahead of me, so he played Fallen Lightsaber. I hit for 3, taking my opponent down to 24, and then he sprung out that Hot Shot Blaster from the resource row for 5 to deal Exaxes, and took it down. But I felt in that game, even with missing that turn 1 play and getting my leader 1-shot. Going into the top 8, knowing that I might face another one, I actually felt like my plan was going to be pretty good. So round 11, I did an intentional draw. I was 9-1. This locked me into the top 8. And my first round of the top 8 was against Michael. He's on the Team Secret competitive team. 2-1 grindy games against Han2 Blue. They go a lot like this. I had for me, it was a very fun line at the end of game 3. I was kind of behind on board. Opponent had a Luke in play. He had an Itinerant Warrior with 1 life in play. I had a Depa and I believe maybe a space unit in play, but my first action was just to hit for 5 with that Depa. I wanted my opponent to kill it with the Luke because the Luke would survive, which was what I was hoping was going to happen. I was hoping he wouldn't use the Itinerant Warrior. He did make that play. He healed 3, but I was able to then play an Ahsoka out of my hand to ping off the Itinerant Warrior that had 1 life. So my opponent at this point had 4 cards in hand, and he only had units, so he discarded a unit. He had an Owen in play. That wasn't a huge deal, but that Owen got exhausted. The Itinerant Warrior was killed. And then with my opponent had 3 cards, he played a Churret. At this point, I sparked I look at his hand. He has another Itinerant Warrior and another Luke. So I take the Itinerant Warrior, which is the other card he could play that turn. I did have the Force Throw in my hand as well, so I was able to play that right after, kill the Churret he had played, and then push a bunch of damage that turn, and that basically locked it up because my opponent had no cards left in hand. So doing a triple discard in 1 turn really bricked the game there for the Han, and that's I was able to kind of flip that board on that turn. So that took me into the top 4, where I played against Ian, who ended up being the finalist, a 2nd place finish with the Kylo deck. So there were 2 Kylos in the top 8, the one that beat me in round 10, and then Ian here. Game 1, once again, this was actually closer than I thought it would be. At one point, at the end of the 5 resource turn, my opponent had no cards left in hand. I really just needed to dodge a powerful 6R turn. I thought I could have it because I had Han Solo in hand, so I knew that even if Kylo flipped, I might be able to actually clear it between my board and my Han. But Ian hit an Anakin off the top. He just obliterated my board. The game basically ended on the spot when that happened. And, I'm not sure I would have won even if he didn't draw the Anakin because, again, I don't really have any main deck interaction for this Kylo deck. Game 2 was kind of a route in my favor. I was able to play Akira on turn 3, which actually bricked Ian's entire turn 3. He couldn't play a card. On the 5R turn, I played an Aggrieved Parliamentarian because I knew Ian had an Anakin in his hand, so I just didn't want him to play it on 6R. And, you know, that Kira to Aggrieved Parliamentarian pulled a ton of weight. He pillaged me on 6R to make me not have any cards in hand, but I have 2 Hotshot Blasters in the resource row. That's what I did for my 6R. Pushed my opponent down to, I think, 9 life remaining. His discard pile was kind of obliterated, so he couldn't flip Kylo immediately. And then I had a surprise strike to take my opponent to 24, and I had a Sabine in play. So the Sabine ping would kill my opponent even if he played Kylo with Sentinel. So I took game 1. Sideboard plan worked great with the Aggrieved Parliamentarian there. And then the game 3, unfortunately, this was streamed. Not going to complain about this too much. I mulliganed a pretty mediocre hand. It didn't have any of my tech cards. It did have a turn 1 play, but I didn't feel comfortable that I was going to be able to win. And then I mulliganed into a hand that I believe was triple Han, double Depa, and Akira. It wasn't great. Might not be exactly the hand, but basically I didn't have a turn 1 or a turn 2 play. I didn't draw into a turn 2 play either. I just kept passing, and Ian just passed back because, yeah, he has no reason to play into me that way. I'm the one that needs to be the aggressor. It would have been even funnier if he just called my bluff and played a unit, because I would have just gotten obliterated way quicker. But there was no reason for him to even take that chance that I had a unit. So he just passed. Basically what happened turn 2 as well, because I did not draw a 3-drop. And this game wasn't really great. It's unfortunate, but I'm not going to say that I think Quinlan can't beat this deck. The deck was really cool. I'm going to talk about it when we review the top 8. This was definitely kind of like the deck of the day in a lot of ways, because it came out of nowhere for most people and performed quite well, right? Placing 2 in the top 8. I believe there were a couple more in the top 16. So, and almost all of them, if not all of them, of the Kylo Tarkentown decks, that is, were from one team, the BN team. All right, so now I'm going to review the meta a little bit. This is the day 1. So this was the open, right? This was almost 2,000 players, and this is a very wide field. Han Blue being almost 300 players is a ton, and then if you add the Han Green, we're talking over 20%, whereas Han 2, that is a huge number. After that, though, like Vader at 7%, Talzin it's 7% basically. That's a lot, but not like a crazy amount. And then you see some usual suspects, right? You see Cad Bane, close to 5%. The Kylo ECL deck was at 4%. We're going to look at the next page here. We have the Kylo Data Vault was at 1.3%, 25 players. So if we add the 25 to the 78 here, we actually get over 100. So it would actually have bumped up to the 4th most played leader after Han 2, Darth Vader, Talzin. And, you know, that made me actually feel pretty good about including the Aggrieved Parliamentarians, because this was a difficult matchup for Quinlan. And I felt that card, although not in a free win against Kylo, was going to help a lot. Sabine, pretty popular and actually had a pretty good conversion rate. Only 4% of the players played it, though. We had Anakin at 3.2, Quinlan at 2.8, Kira at 2.4. It really starts to dwindle down as we get going. Han 2 was the big story. And, you know, Han 2, an incredibly powerful deck, but it's not quite on like Django levels of powerful. So if you remember last set before Django was banned, he was rocking these kinds of percentages, maybe more, maybe a little less at some events, but he was also converting through those percentages, even though the entire card playing population knew that it was the deck to beat and was coming prepared for that. It was still surviving. And Han 2, I don't think it quite has that power level. So when the entire pool of players is out to get you, you don't do as well. Now, it did convert pretty well into day 2, but it actually didn't end up converting that well into day 3, although 2 did make the top 8. So, of course, the deck is still like one of the best decks in the game. it just isn't as pushed as Django, let's say. It's not as easy to run, let me rephrase. It's not as difficult to tech against it as it is Django. A lot of decks were prepped for this, and it's why, even though it had a ton of power to it, its conversion to day 3 wasn't insanely high. And here we see the day 2. Now, its day 2 conversion was quite high, not only because a lot of people from day 1 made day 2, but it's a lot of the people that had buys chose to run it as well. So Han Blue at 23% here. And then if we want to include the Han Green, let me see. Oh, Han Green's right there at 3.7, another 21 players. So it's actually almost 27% of the day 2 field. Talzin and Quinlan now are 2 and 3. And this has more to do with the people that had buys playing it than the people from day 1 qualifying with it. And then the Sabine at 4, and Sabine did have a pretty good conversion rate from day 1 into day 2, and then some people did bring it. The rest you see here, I mean, Darth Vader definitely dropped down quite a bit from its day 1 rate. You don't even see Kylo Green on this page, although you'll see it right after, back-to-back, 10 and 10, ECL and Data Vault. So if you add those 20, it would have been right above the Darth Vader in terms of popularity. And then we also have that Kylo Tarkin Town deck, 14 members playing in, and I believe almost everyone, if not everyone, was from that same team, the BN team. A few of them converted from day 1, and then a bunch of them had buys, were playing it too. But yeah, that was basically the meta. Leaders didn't really change that much. It was more about like which ones jumped, right? Like the Quinlan jumped all the way up to 3rd place. It was something in 9th or something like that at first. And then, you know, Kira, a big favorite of mine in the past, only had 10 players playing it. The Kira Data Vault deck. Not a lot of people running Kira right now. All right. I'm not going to do this one too much, but if you want to see this spreadsheet, you can go to SW Competitive Hub. You can see some matchup breakdowns. We'll highlight that Han 2 Force Blue. See a decent amount of negative matchups for it in that top pool. And, you know, it's none of them other than maybe the Kylo and Anakin Force Blue. I'm not sure that's a real counter, are that terrible, but it's difficult if every deck is trying to beat you, right? You need a ton of power in a deck to be able to get through that kind of targeting. Something Django did really well, something that Boba has done very well in the previous sets, but Han 2, maybe not quite on the power level of that. And, you know, that might actually bode well for it, because I expect some people to move off this deck now after this event, and maybe some will jump into some other things, and maybe some of the tech cards will have to change, especially with a newcomer like the Kylo Tarkin Town deck. So it might give this Han 2 deck a bit of breathing room. I will still consider it one of, if not the best decks overall in power level in the game. I don't see that really changing. It still does some incredibly powerful things. It just wasn't able to kind of survive being targeted so heavily. All right. So this is the day 3 meta now. And this is, you know, way less players now. And still at number 1, Han 2, but we saw that it was between the Han 2s, they were almost like 27% of day 2, and now we're at 16%. If we let's see if we can find the Han 2 green. Not even on the page. Oh no, it is 1 player. So 13 Han 2s. That's a decrease in conversion, right? If it started at 27% and ends up at like 16 or 17%, it means it underperformed. Sabine actually being the 2nd most popular deck here, kind of crazy. 8 players, and then that Kylo deck, 6 of the 14 converted, and it ends up being the 3rd most played deck here because of that. And 2 of those made the top 8. So this is kind of the story of the tournament, the new deck that is maybe here to stay, and that decks other builds will have to start prepping for. Quinlan, which included myself, was in 4th, and Talzin, which ended up winning the whole tournament, right there as well. And we see some Cads, Anakins, Vaders, some Idens. That's where like the villain blue-green kind of had the most success. And then, yeah, a few stragglers to the bottom there. But yeah, let's go into this top 8. So gonna start right with the champion. This is Betten. He's from the Enigma team. He's European team, and crazy run. I met Betten. He's a great guy. Well-deserved run here. Play Talzin with some really interesting choices, and I spoke to him a bit about the deck. And, you know, I've played a lot of Talzin, but I had the most issue with, like, control decks, especially, like, blue-green villain decks. And while Betten and his teammate Sip did say that it might be their most difficult matchup, they kind of had a plan. A lot of burn, if you can see. So there's Devastators in the main. There's things like Hotshot Blasters and Arm to the Teeth to push surprise damage. In the sideboard, there's Crates, a third Devastator, and a Planetary Bombardment. They came within a plan that they weren't actually just going to try to, like, aggro from the start. They're going to try to push damage basically throughout the curve all game, go into that top end, and just, like, have more and more ways to deal damage, right? Devastator always deals 4. Crate Dragon, it always deals like 4, right? We say this is basic, like it's a 9 cost for a cause. It's just damage from hand, damage from hand, damage from hand. Some other interesting choices is Krennic, a card I've looked at. Decided not to really run it in the builds that I've played with Talzin. I'm definitely going to revisit it. It just gives you a bit of a sturdier turn 1 play, and it works well with things like all these when defeated units like Acolyte, Karis, Night Sister Warrior, Jedi in Hiding. It lets you double, like, play 2 cards on turn 2 often, especially Force Throw is one of them. Doing like Krennic into like Jedi in Hiding plus Force Throw is really nice. And yeah, it just gives you a better unit, I should say, than some other things. Secretive Sage was the... Oh no, Secretive Sage isn't here as well. So they have... I'm trying to think which 2-drop is not being included, but in fact, it just looks like there's more 2-drops, which is, you know, really interesting. And Hotshot Blaster, you know, this is not the only deck playing Hotshot Blaster that isn't yellow. Kylo Tarkentown has one of those in it as well. Card is proving to be good even when you pay 5 for it. And interestingly enough, I think its main use is like kind of on the flip turn. Instead of flipping, you can just play this, push a bunch of damage, force these control decks to react to whatever your new threat is. Gives you an opportunity to flip. It doesn't spend a card out of your hand, so it keeps you card neutral. So just a cool card. Arm to the Teeth is another one. Just push damage from that row without having to spend cards. And see a couple Purge Troopers here as well, likely just to give you a little more oomph into maybe Mirrors, into Han 2. Those are, I guess, the primary places, but there's Force units kind of around in general. And a last interesting piece of tech is the Sun, which is once again kind of surprise damage from hand. As long as you have any unit ready, you can get some more damage pushed. So really like this build. I'm sure you can watch some games of Betten playing. He was on stream a bunch. But yeah, congrats to the world champ right here. And this is the second place. This is Ian Lego Pizza from BN. He beat me in the semifinals with the Kylo Tarkentown deck. So now let's kind of deep dive into this one a little bit. This is the new deck of the format, and one that I would expect people to start picking up now, which means you should start preparing for it a little bit and understanding how to play around this deck, what sideboard cards are good into it, and things like that. So this is an aggro deck that also plays a little board control earlier. Its most powerful turn 1 play has to be Miggs Mayfeld, because with Tarkentown, it's basically just going to remove your turn 1 play unless your turn 1 play is a shielded unit. So like, for instance, for me, I would have loved to start with like L3. That was like the best turn 1 play I would have had, because it prevents the Miggs Mayfield blowout. So that's kind of one way they try to interact early. Another is with Witch of the Mist, which turns on Force Throw as early as turn 1, especially with Tarkentown. Once again, that's going to kill your turn 1 play. Very powerful. They don't play any 3-drop units, so they're doing things like Power the Dark Side or 2-drop plus Force Throw, or if they have a Force unit play, they might just Force Lightning your play. Sometimes they'll just go full aggro. They have a bunch of lightsabers that they can play on their turn 1 unit. They're going to do a Fallen Lightsaber Constructed, just push damage. If that's in the wheelhouse, if it's against the right opponent that's not playing things like Waylay or Power of the Dark Side, they have opportunities to do that. And of course, the deck filters pretty well, so they can find a lot of opportunities to play a lot of different cards. Now let's pivot into like, what are the power plays here, right? So first of all, you have Anakin in this deck, and they're only playing 3 heroic cards here, the heroic resolves, so it's not always double triggering, but even when it's single triggers, it's quite powerful, and this is aimed to bridge into that Kylo turn. And this Kylo turn, I'm not gonna like fully deep dive into this. I've not played against this deck a ton, but it's incredibly powerful. It's kind of we say OTK, it's not always like a one-turn kill sort of thing. But what ends up happening, especially if they've chipped damage at you with things like MIGs or their 2-drops, or just like one guy hit you for 5 with like a lightsaber, things like this, all of a sudden this Anakin can flip, hit you for something like 12, 10 damage, and just put you in check immediately, so that if you can't kill them, they're just going to claim and hit you again. And of course, there is Mahdi in this deck as well, so there are opportunities to actually OTK you, where you attack with Kylo. If he has a Sith holocron on him, he can self-kill the Mahdi and immediately ready, right? And this works really well with snapshot reflexes, because you get to attack immediately. You just kill that Mahdi and you ready up. If your opponent gets 1 action to interact with that Kylo, if not, you're just dealing infinite damage over 2 attacks. So you got Infiltrator skill to get through Sentinels. The Sith holocron is 1 cost for potentially 3 damage. Battle Fury is 2 cost for potentially 3 damage. You got some, the Constructed Lightsaber is 4. The Fallen is 3, right? You got Hot Shot Blaster. I mentioned that I lost to this card in game 2 in round 10 from the resource row. So just a lot of burst potential and very difficult stuff to play around throughout. And their early game is quite powerful on the back of things like MIGs, Force Lightning, Force Throw, Witch of the Mist turning on these cards really easily. So really cool deck, very innovative. And yeah, like I expect this deck now to be part of the meta. I think it's powerful enough to survive even when people know it exists. It's not gonna forever take everyone by surprise anymore, and certainly decks will start to include sideboard tech. Like Hantu Blue, I think, was very soft as currently built into this deck, but we'll have to start including some ways to interact with this, whatever it may be. I know a Grief Parliamentarian will probably be like the first stop for a lot, and I think it's a solid choice. I have that card. I won the only game I drew it, but it's not a silver bullet by any means. It's not like, oh, I play 3 of these and this Kylo deck can't beat me. They can play around that card. They can hold back some upgrades. They also are kind of an aggro deck, so they're sometimes pushing damage anyway. So it's of course good, but don't think of it as like this is enough or it automatically wins. It's a card I would definitely look to include if I can fit room for it in a sideboard right now. But yeah, just it might not be all you need. You might need some other tech. All right, we're going to skip my review and go straight into Cerberus's deck here, who is a teammate of Ian. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I believe it's exactly 1 card different, or maybe it's the exact same list. But yeah, so he finished in 4th place, and this Kylo deck also beat me in round 10. So not much new to add here. But let's go down into the second half of the bracket. This is 5th place. This is Josh Everly. He's of Team Secret. He played Hantu Blue. And, you know, I really like how clean this list is. I like the Rivals Fall main deck. And there's a second in the sideboard. That's a card, for instance, that could help against these Kylo decks if you're able to pull that off. Again, it's better if you're able to apply pressure against them, because then they kind of have to deploy instead of just kind of like churning actions. You can see 3 crates, of course, like that's the top end of this deck. 1 forces with me. I saw this in a few Hantu Blues throughout the day. It was never actually played against me. I think it's an interesting thing because one thing this deck does struggle a little bit with is just like pushing or turning the corner. It doesn't have pumps, right? It doesn't have like quick damage unless you're playing something like Cassian, which this version is not. But forces with me is a nice way to kind of like try to turn that corner. The Daughter's an interesting tech here. I expect it was just for things like space aggro and maybe Sabine, get a little more help there. There's one Anakin and one Chewbacca. I like Anakin a lot in this build. I've seen also ways to include some villainous cards to double trigger him. Things like Force Lightning or Force Choke are usually the first two on my mind. I like the red 5 include. I think the Grogu red 5 line can be quite powerful, especially in mirrors. But yeah, this is a standard list with some really interesting tech. Like the Owen is not in every list. I find Owen to be pretty strong a lot of the time. The Obi, I really like that one. I think especially against decks like Quinlan and Talzin, the Obi can be quite powerful. There's a second one in the sideboard. But yeah, a solid build. Something like this will probably need to be tweaked a little bit if Kylo Tarkentown really like forms into the meta. But Han 2 Blue is not going anywhere. It's still a very powerful deck, even though it kind of underperformed that day 2 to day 3 conversion. And in 6th place is Michael, also of Team Secret. So we're not going to need to spend too much time on this. I believe this is card for card the same deck that I just reviewed. This was my opponent in the top 8. Michael's a great guy, a great player, and Obi absolutely obliterated me in game 2. I think I mentioned why I like that card in this deck at times. You know, it's not a card you ever want to play against like a villainous blue deck that plays no glory, but in a lot of places he can be quite good. All right, now we get some spice. I mean, we had spice with the Kylo Tarkentown deck, but this has to be even spicier by Magog29. Pilot Han, Tarkentown, space aggro deck. So cool to see. Like, this is a rogue deck. Like, this like the Kylo Tarkentown was also a rogue deck, but it had a full team teching it, and like they figured something out and they brought like a bunch of players playing it. This is even more rogue than that, and making top 8 with this is really awesome. I like this leader. When it came out, my whole goal with this leader was to play him with the tactical bomber, so that I could do like a combo where I would play the bomber, flip onto it, ready it with something like BB-8 or there's another card, the K-turn card, and then like hit for a bunch of damage with indirect. I always wanted to pull off that combo. It never ended up working that well for me, but number one thing, C3PO is completely broken in this deck because you get to look at the top card of your deck before you play him, so you can just draw a card on turn 1. That's really good. The 1-drop spam works really well against a lot of decks. Just gets you 2 units into play immediately. Really powerful. You see some of this interaction, main deck jam communications, really nice. It's odd, so it does, when you reveal it off the Han, you can pump with it, which is important, unlike Spark of Rebellion. You have Burn with Daring Raid. You have Swoop Downs for ground interaction. Really like that. Never tell me the odds. I'm gonna have to ask how many times that worked and how many times that whiffed. But it's pretty cool to see. Sanctioner's Shuttle is a really smart include when you're playing a bunch of 1-drop spam. Think about this as like a similar idea as like the Vader pilot deck that goes double 1-drop and then just tries to capture your turn 1 or turn 2 play with it. This deck might not do it as consistently because it's not making tokens every turn, but it does push damage quicker because of its pumps and the leader coming out quicker as well. Plo Koon, really, that's a really cool include because, of course, this is a space deck, so like, why are we playing a ground ambusher? But, you know, ground units typically do more damage than space units, so it's a way to kind of flip that script. You get to remove their largest ground unit while you're pushing in space, and its coordinate's going to be on quite a lot because of all the weenies you're playing. And the same with this Poe, where, you know, your opponent's trying to interact up there, spending time with removal, and then you just slam this giant unit that they might not be able to mess with. So, you know, I'll check this one out. You go run it as well. Let me know what you think and how it plays for you. But it's a really cool deck. I know this struggled a little bit into the Kylo Tarkentown deck. In fact, I believe Magog also lost to it twice. Same with me. And, you know, you might need some more tech. Now, there are Fang Fighters here. There's one Bamboozle. Bamboozle, I think, with Aggrieved Parliamentarian are both very good sideboard cards into the Kylo deck. So it's something this deck can run, of course, because it is a yellow deck. and Bamboozle. You know, you have enough yellow cards to discard to it. So a lot to like here, and cool to see it. And in 8th place, Yako with the Vader pilot, the only Vader pilot to make it into this top 8. And, you know, I played against Yako. He plays very tight. And, you know, the deck looks very... I'm not going to say this is like a brand new deck. This looks almost identical to what it would have looked like last set. I believe there's only one card in the main deck from set 5, and that is the Forged Starfighter, the Hidden Raid 1-drop. So it's just another option at the 1-drop slot. And then he included Scimitars, which is also a set 5 card in the sideboard. This deck, I mean, I talked to Yako. His opponent, he played against a Kylo Tarkentown once, and they started MIGs, and that was a huge problem. So you might need to find ways to not get completely blown out by that. And there certainly are, and maybe swoop downs need to come into the main deck so that you can kill that MIG. So even if he kills one of your turn 1 plays, you can then immediately kill him with the swoop down and get him off the board. So I would look to maybe include those in the main deck if you're expecting some Migs Mayfeld action, because he really does a number on this deck in general. 3 outmaneuvers is a solid call if you're expecting to have to race into a lot of ground decks. And, you know, those Han Blue decks, they can race you sometimes because they do have a lot of restore. You can push a bunch of damage. So it's an interesting card to include there as well, in addition to the 3 Nogatumi Deads and the 3 Wele. That's kind of the interaction grouping there. So congrats to Yako for his 8th place finish, taking this very sturdy aggro deck all the way to the top of the Galactic Championships. All right, so just to wrap this up, looking forward, so meta adaptation, right? We kind of have a new breakout deck. It's the Kylo Tarkentown deck. How do the current meta decks respond to that? And then how does Kylo Tarkentown respond to those potential changes, right? Are a bunch of decks going to be running Aggrieved Parliamentarian, Bamboozle, things like Kit Fisto's Ether Sprite, maybe just tossing out ideas. I'm not even sure that card's any good against that deck. Ways to interact with Kylo's early units, especially MIGs. Will more decks start playing things like Daring Raid just to remove him? And then does that really cause problems for Kylo? Because a lot of games rely a lot on that being able to remove things. So all kinds of things to consider, and we'll see how decks adapt in both directions. PQ season starting like this weekend, which is crazy. Gonna start prepping. What are you gonna prep? Let me know. Not going to spend a lot of time on suspensions. I have no idea if they're coming. I'll keep tabs on it. If they ban something, I'll make a video about it and we'll start talking about the new format. But for now, I'm playing under the assumption that nothing is changing. So what we have is what we have. And it still is a force throw dominated meta. 6 of the 8 decks in the top 8 were force throw decks. It was even more if you go into the top 16 or something. And yeah, it's a lot of different decks though. So that is a positive. And then lastly, really cool news. We are getting limited events starting this season. We're going to have limited PQs. There's going to be limited at regionals. Next Worlds will be a mixed format. I believe all regionals now will also be mixed formats, which means limited and constructed. So expect to see more limited content now that it's going to be part of the competitive circuit. And I really like drafting. I think draft is incredibly skill intensive format, and it's very fun as well. You get a brand new meta game evolves in draft. It's not random. Real metas do come out in limited, and now that we will be spending more time on it because it's in the pro circuit, certainly we will find those metas as well. So let me know if you're excited for limited, as excited for limited as I am, because I think it'll be a great time. But yeah, that's what I got for you. That's my Galactic Championship recap. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. If I met you in Vegas, it was nice to meet you. It was nice to meet everyone that came up to me. It was a great time. And until next time, take care.